Hey, Dave, why is that fog moving with us? Welcome to my channel. I focus on tabletop role-playing games, video games, and science fiction. Back in 1978, the Dragon number 3 was published, and in it there was an article entitled Vampire in the Dungeon, or Hey Dave, why is that fog moving with us? Now, as the saying goes, I'm an old grognard. I have played the original Dungeons and Dragons and liked the original Dungeons and Dragons, and there are still some things about it that I prefer over later editions, except the later editions make it easier to find things because it was difficult. And the article talked about vampires. And these are original Dungeons and Dragons vampires, which are probably nastier than any other edition. They've mellowed them. They've not made them quite as difficult to kill. Because in original Dungeons and Dragons, you could take gaseous form and switch back and forth and various things. And they're really an insidious creature. Now, I did a video called Wizards Going Their Own Way, WGTOW, about a lich. And a lich wants to live alone. They're wrapped up in their studies. Now, if you haven't read the book Dracula, stop right now, go find a copy online. There are numerous. I'll try and put a link in below, and read Stoker's Dracula. I'm serious. You really need to read the original book. Don't pay attention to the movies. Get the book and read the book. It's really important that you understand what a vampire really is if you're going to put one in your campaign. And read Dracula. None of the other stuff, none of the comic books, none of the stuff. Read the original source material, and it will really make your skin crawl. The thing that's so vivid in my mind is the description of smells. Stoker really talked about the smells of death and and so on, and it's really an excellent book. And you should read the book. Don't pay, the movies are whatever, but the book is so much better than all the movies and all the graphic novels and everything else. So you take a look at what Stoker wrote, and you understand why the Dracula is such, and the vampire is such a terrifying creature. And let's talk about it. The vampire doesn't want to be like the lich. The vampire is a social creature. If you read Dracula, you realize just how important that is. Dracula had his, for lack of a better term, harem. He had his followers they are the follower vampires. I use the term vampire followers or follower vampires. In the 5th edition, on page 298, you run into vampire spawn. This is what I'm talking about. This is why the vampires are social creatures. They socialize with a very narrow section of society, their spawn, but they are very active with those. And vampires become very established. Now, why would a vampire ever leave? Which is the interesting question in Dracula, and it's because that it just starts to get, shall we say, stale. Now, I wish I could find this. Maybe there's an article that was published many years ago, and it just gives you an idea why a vampire would move on. And I've hunted, and I haven't been able to find it in Google. It was a story about armadillos. I believe it was up one of the northern states. I think it might have been North Dakota. There was a zoo, and they had a small collection of armadillos, and there was this old armadillo who'd been there for a long time. They didn't know how old he was, but he might have been the oldest armadillo in captivity. And the story goes that he was starting to move kind of slow. Now, zoos transfer animals from one to another, and they were looking at this old armadillo and they thought, okay, it's cold up here. He's moving kind of slow. He's getting up there. Why don't we transfer him down to another zoo as part of the transfers? Put him into a sunnier climate so he can have his last few days, on Earth in a much nicer climate, much more suitable for him. So there were about 12, I guess, armadillos in the group he was with. And they box him up and they ship him off to supposedly Florida. That's the story I remember. And they ship him off, and the enclosure in Florida has a large number of armadillos. I think more than 40, might have been as many as 60. And they bring the box out and they set it down on the ground and they open it up, and the old armadillo steps out, puts his nose in the air and sniffs and looks around and walks up over to the big, toughest armadillo in the bunch, walks up to him and proceeds to beat it up terribly. The zookeepers are all worried that this young armadillo is going to hurt this old armadillo, but the old armadillo just beats the snot out of this young armadillo. And within a week, he's taken over the entire enclosure. All the females belong to his harem. He's walking spryly. He's spending a lot of time with the ladies, and he's having a lot of fun, and and all the other male armadillos are terrified of him. It's not that he was old. It's not that he was slowing down. He was bored. If you're a man, you have some idea about this. But it's the argument is, here is a vampire. In Bram Stoker's Dracula, he's moving on because there isn't anything new and exciting where he's been. It's why he's planning to move to London, where there's a lot of things going on, where there's fresh blood, shall we say, to infuse it. So the vampire would occasionally move. And if he was going to leave his vampire spawn, and it's only when things went bad in London did he go back to his original castle. So vampires turn out to be a very, very nasty creature to deal with, because you've got the vampire spawn, you've got the wolves, you've got the rats, you've got the gaseous form. Now, the argument is in original Dungeons and Dragons that the gaseous form could move as fast as the party, which was that's one thing that they've mellowed in 5th edition. It can't quite move as fast. But the idea was the vampire you'd have a fog rolling in where you're going, which is actually interesting because in the 5th edition it says a creeping fog clings to the ground within 500 feet of the vampire's lair. So the vampire has natural camouflage because there's always fog in that area. And he can take gaseous form, and so he's going to blend in with the fog. You're going to have a hard time knowing that he's there. And then in original Dungeons and Dragons, he could just pop back into vampire form, charm a creature, and transform out. Now, in 5th edition, he's not quite that powerful, but this is a valid attack method. He can come in with gaseous form, slide up behind someone, transform back from gaseous form into normal form, tap them on the shoulder, they turn, and he charms them. So, this makes it, or tries to charm them. If he's successful, this gets really kind of nasty, because now you've got characters that are charmed in the party, and nobody in the party knows it, because you pick up the last one at the tail end of the party. You pick them off from the back so that nobody's watching. And he's got high perception, he's got stealth, and you've got other things to distract. And the vampire can control rats and so on. And it's the interesting phrase, you're walking along and a rat scurries by. Not a giant rat, doesn't attack you, but a rat just scurries by. The vampire knows his lair. He knows he can control these rats, and they're his spies. They know what's going on, and he knows what's going on. And dealing with a character that's almost omniscient is very, very difficult. You're not going to surprise the vampire. And he will throw his spawn to distract, to attack from the other direction, and so on. So he or she could be a very nasty creature to deal with. This is why vampires are so insidious. Because if they succeed and they bite one of the characters, they eventually become a spawn. And what happens is they do it with the townspeople. He can replenish his ranks of spawn fairly easily. So he can throw them into battle, and they'll follow the lead of their master so that he's got shock troops that are willing to sacrifice themselves to keep the master alive. And this is an insidious creature. He's intelligent. He's been around for a long time. And think about it. That actually, from one point of view, the book Dracula is sort of a romance where Dracula's going after Lucy. And he wants Lucy as one of his spawn. And it's a three-party romance that you've, it was three-sided. It just gets kind of bizarre. There are some interesting sexual overtones in the original Dracula, which haven't been in many of the movies. The one with Frank Langella was actually the best. If you are going to watch a Dracula movie, that one I recommend. And if you can get a copy of the full color version, not the one where they played with the colors and desaturated, that's awful because it was such a vivid, colorful film. But that one isn't. I couldn't find a copy of that one. But I remember going to the movies to see that one. But it starts to play with the sexual tones that are in there. But Dracula is a social creature. He wants social interaction. He wants to keep replenishing his spawn. Or she. You could do it as she. I just keep thinking of Dracula as the vampire if you're going to do that. But the vampires in the dungeon or creating the vampire lair is truly insidious. And it makes that they're a very difficult creature. If you play them correctly, they're very, very difficult for a party to defeat. And because they're going to know the party's coming. And they are prepared. And like anyone that's prepared, there are multiple exits out of the lair. There are secret exits out of the lair that only the vampire knows, or one or two of his spawn know. And there are traps that, think about it, he can just routinely, the way he goes to part of the lab is changes to gaseous form or to go through there, and then slides through the narrow cracks to get into there. And there's no other way in. He's sealed it up. Now, you have to use passwall or something else like that to get through there. But the vampire can create a lair that mere mortals have a difficult time getting into because the only way in is in gaseous form. So this gives you an idea. Think about if you have a high-level party and you want to give them a challenge. Think about doing a vampire. Read Dracula. See what the book actually gives there, and take a look at what they've written up about Dracula in the 5th edition. And it's like his perception is +7 and stealth +9, and his passive perception of 17. He or she is a very nasty, powerful creature. And though they say the challenge is only 13, if you start adding a bunch of vampire spawn as his harem, which they're at a challenge of 5, if you add 30 of those into the mix, you have a very powerful, very dangerous encounter. And see how that goes with your party. Does your party survive? Is this a TPK situation? Is it possible to defeat a vampire? I sometimes wonder, particularly if you get the more powerful vampires that are there. So if you get a chance, I recommend not only reading the Dracula by Bram Stoker, but also if you can find a copy of Dragon Volume 3, number 3, I think it is, the one with the article Vampire in the Dungeon, or Hey Dave, why is that fog moving with us? If you can find a copy of that article, I highly encourage you to read that. It's a great story. It gives you some ideas of how to play the vampire, and true, later editions are not quite as nasty, but they're still a very powerful creature. It gives you some ideas how to attack with them. So give me your comments. Have you put vampires in your encounters? How has the party survived? Have they just defeated the vampire as a normal monster, or have they been turned, shall we say? I'd like to hear your comments. Thank you for watching my video. I look forward to learning what you think about this video. Let me know in the comments below. If you like the video, press the thumbs up button. You can subscribe by clicking the link in the lower left. If you are interested, there are links to more content.